Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We will now move on to the third and also the last session of today for Taiwan Computer Emergency Response Team and Coordination Center. In this session, we will be having 4 speakers share their insights and roadmap on TWCERT CC. Our first speaker is Mr. Ku-Chieh Chen. Mr. Chen is an IoT cybersecurity analyst and the head of Panasonic Cybersecurity Lab. And now, without further ado, let's welcome Mr. Chen.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great honor to be invited to give a talk here. Thanks to ICANN and TWNIC and your time. The topic of my talk today is navigating IoT risk and the cybersecurity landscape in enterprises. Before starting this talk, please allow me to introduce myself. Take a moment. My name is Chen Ku-Chieh, nickname is Hsiao. I am the head of the cybersecurity lab at Panasonic, in charge of IoT security projects. Before joining Panasonic, I assist the Criminal Investigation Bureau with cybercrime investigation and did cybersecurity defense for the Sun City government. When I was at NCIST, I was responsible for some cyber war projects. This is the agenda for my today's talk. I will introduce the cyber threats in enterprise networks and the role of IoT products in enterprise, security IoT product lifecycle, and how to use IoT products safely in enterprise. So, what is the cyber threat in enterprise networks? We often think that cyber threats only come from hackers, but that's not entirely true. The first threat is online service in the enterprise, such as the official website, cloud server, and the remote work from home system. Due to the network administrator do not have sufficient control over risks, so this system frequently become weakness in the network and prefer targets for hackers. The network architecture is the second threat due to administrators' misconfigurations. It becomes risky when a network system is unnecessarily exposed to the internet and lacks hierarchical network management, allowing hackers to freely move within the internal network. The third threat is the guest. Sometimes guests need to connect to the internal network for meeting or for some business reasons. If their device and the network are not properly managed for cybersecurity risk, it can put the enterprise at risk. The fourth threat is employees within the company. If employees' information devices are not adequately controlled, it can result in information leaks from the company. This is especially important when employee leaves, and is a key aspect of ISMS control. Besides the above threats mentioned, IT administrator has a crucial role in the network security. They are close connected to all the mentioned threats, and any mistake they make can lead to significant losses for the enterprise. Okay, this is a traditional network defense architecture, or we can call defense poses. It commonly used in medium to large enterprise. This diagram shows that network is divided into four zones: the internet-facing zone, and the DNZ zone, and the OA zone, and the development environment. For the internet-facing zone, the essential components we use are like load balancer and firewalls and IDS or IPS as defense device at the outermost layer of the network. In the DNZ and server zone, we place servers that provide service to external network users, such as web server and VPN servers and the email server. The OA network zone typically includes employee computers, an AD or LDAP server, and the DNS server for the internal user. In the developer environment zone, there are testing servers, developer computer, and testing database, among others. We usually use firewalls between these network zones to block network threats and managing risk regularly. Also, we implement comprehensive network segmentation and deploy a lot of network security defense devices. Enterprises still continue to encounter a lot of cybersecurity attack or incidents. That's why in the past decade, network security vendors introduced a concept of zero trust and the various zero trust architecture products. This concept is proposed to address overlooked vulnerabilities in network, by treating all user or systems or components as untrusted, and implementing multi-factor authentication and effective risk management, so it can be minimized. Okay. Earlier, we discussed about traditional network architecture and the concept of zero trust. Now, let's talk about the 7 roles of IoT products in enterprise networks. The first one is IoT network infrastructure. In the IT network, we often use Wi-Fi app access point to provide wireless network service. We use NAS for data sharing, and some smart devices, such as smartphone, laptop, or tablet, to access the enterprise network. The second role is physical security devices. We use IP camera to monitor the sensitive property, and we take the door access control system to control sensitive data or sensitive area, and utilize sensors for provide abnormal detection, such as smoke detector. Additionally, some enterprises utilize productivity tools like field IP phone, office printer, video decoder, and robot arm, which all fall under the category of IoT products. These laws mentioned above represent a typically used case of IoT devices in normal operation. Okay. So how about in the eyes of hackers? IoT products in enterprise network play several roles. The first one is enterprise network infection point. For hackers, IoT products exposed to the internet become their favorite infection point. This is because most of these products are often vulnerable due to negligence and by administrator and are not closely monitored by strict network segmentation or cyber defense system. A second one is physical security blind spot. In rating exercise, real-world rating exercise, IoT products like IP cameras, door access control system, and threat detection sensors are prime targets for a rating exercise. If hackers gain access and control over these devices, it creates a blind spot in the physical security, allowing them to launch a real-world attack within the enterprise. And the third one in the eyes of hackers is network attack weapon. Common network attack tools include DDoS attack and many middle attacks. In DDoS attacks, hackers compromise IoT products, flood the network with traffic, exploiting vulnerability in the internal enterprise network. And usually they will also do many middle attack, like manipulate MAC address to intercept sensitive data transmission within the internal network. This is attack exploit weak defenses of IoT and are difficult to detect. And last one is hacker's jump server. When a hacker enters an internal network, their first goal is to avoid detection or hide their tracks. So if they can use an IoT device as a jump server for lateral movement, they will take advantage of it. IoT devices are preferred due to their weaker network defense capabilities, lack of comprehensive logging, and lower chance of being noticed. This is a news come from 2019. Microsoft already won whole world, the Russia state hacking group APT28, or we can call Fancy Beer, was using IoT device to compromise the enterprise networks. The online news note that Microsoft Threat Intelligence Center found the hacker group tried to exploit a VoIP phone and office printer and a video decoder. In two of the cases, the password for the devices were deployed without changing the default manufacturer's password. So hacker can easily log in or easily compromise the device. And in the third instance, the latest security update had not been applied to the devices. Microsoft said hackers use compromised IoT devices as an entry point into their targets' internal networks. So where they can scan for other vulnerable systems to expand this initial foothold. After hacker gain access to each of the IoT devices, the actor ran TCP dump to sniff the network traffic on local subnet, as I mentioned before. As the actor moved from one device to another, they would drop a simple shell script to establish the persistence on the network, which allowed extended access to continue hunting. So we can see IoT product in the enterprise is very, very important thing. We need to take care of it. Okay. After discuss the threat posed by IoT products in the enterprise, let's talk about what the security IoT product lifecycle entails. Security IoT products lifecycles refers to a necessary cycle that a secure IoT product should have, from designing and manufacturing to the end of life. In my view, the security IoT product lifecycle consists of 6 stages, each with different tasks and to ensure the product security. The first stage is a product plan and analysis. During this stage, we identify the components and the suppliers for the product. It is important to maintain a bill of materials and monitor the supplier to address any vulnerabilities in the components. Manufacturers often overlook this stage. Additionally, threat analysis should be conducted to identify and assess potential threats such as brute force attack and insecure data transmission, etc. The second stage is product design. When designing IoT products, integrating with cloud service become important. So making secure system architecture and data transmission vital. Traditional manufacturer may lack the talent in cybersecurity area to design a security IoT products. It is recommended to seek third party or some professional to help them to consult them to during this stage to ensure the development of security IoT products. The third stage is implementation. This phase involves product engineers who should address the basic product security issue during development, utilizing automated debugging software. Example of such issue include code logic problem or some default account credential. The fourth stage is testing and integration, which is the most common phase for product security verification after product development. Professional cybersecurity experts perform security testing such as code analysis, vulnerability assessment, and penetration testing. The fifth stage is maintenance. It involves managing product security after release. Bug bounty program can be used to involve why hackers help to improve the product security. A product security incident like PCERT should be in place to handle security incident and patch vulnerabilities properly. Reduce network security risk from customer. The final stage is end of life. We call EOL, where manufacturers no longer provide support for bug fix and security issues. However, EOL products still pose risks. So, end users should be informed about the potential vulnerabilities and associated harm. Okay, it's the final part of this talk. Let's share how to use IoT products safely. And this slide is summarizing the concept discussed earlier. Here are 4 guidelines for using IoT product in enterprise. The first one is PCERT. When enterprise purchase buy some IoT products, it is essential to confirm whether the manufacturer has the PCERT or not. This ensures that when a security incident or product vulnerability occur, proper vulnerability patches and alerts can be effectively addressed. Security testing is the second one. Manufacturers need to conduct penetration testing and vulnerability assessment by cybersecurity experts before shipping IoT products. This is a very important step to identify and eliminate security vulnerability. The third one is a secure network architecture. As I mentioned before, enterprises should implement a segmented network architecture with correspondingly relate security defenses device in different area or different zone. Additionally, enterprise can adopting the concept of zero trust is recommended. This involves implementing secure identification of every user in the network through methods like multi-factor authentication. And the last one is risk management. Enterprise should adopt ISO 27001 to manage information products risks and utilize the cyber defense matrix we call CDN for assessing solutions and identify the cybersecurity gaps. Thanks for listening and your time. That's it for my talk.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, please give a big hand to Mr. Chen for his remarkable presentation. And for each of the session, we will have the Q&A session separately right after every speaker session. So for now, do we have any online or on-site participants' questions? Or do we have any question from our other speakers? Please also feel free to put them forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so for now, maybe as we don't have any questions for this session, we will close the session here. And once again, thank you, Mr. Chen, for the fruitful sharing. And moving on, we will be having our second speaker, Mr. Jamie Gillespie, to be our speaker. He is the Internet Security Specialist from APNIC. Mr. Gillespie provides security training, outreach, and development of computer security incident response teams, network operators, and law enforcement agencies across 56 economies in the Asian Pacific region. And it's of great honor to have him with us today. And now, without further ado, let's welcome Mr. Gillespie.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Presentation that I'm going through today is a very small niche area that I had interest in, and I'm hoping that it catches other people's interests as well, as it's something that's not as easily exposed. So I'm going to be looking at SMTP email server encryption implementations, or TLS implementations. So we're going to be looking at the importance of security, looking at security options currently for SMTP servers, the methodology for the research that I did, analysis of the security, and then some recommendations at the end as well. The slides are probably a little bit more than the time I have to present, so I may go through quickly on some of them, but these slides will be available that you can look at and download off the website later. And you can contact me for more information and you can ask questions as well. So when we look at email, and you have to remember how important email is to our daily lives, both as individuals, as companies as well. Think about what's in your inbox, in all of your email, for both home and at work. You might have personally identifiable information, not just about yourself, but about others. You may even have credit card information. I know when I have to give information to register for staying at a hotel in another country that I travel to, sometimes I have to scan in copies of my credit card, sign forms, and scan and send those off by email to the hotel. There may be health information, especially if you're going to hospital or visiting your doctor and they send an email with test results to you. That ends up in your email as well as their email. Passwords, one-time password codes, and login links to services are all sent via email. We also end up with blog posts with a title such as how to send sensitive information over email. Now, the blog post that I mentioned here goes into details on how not to do it, but the title almost gives people permission to send sensitive information over email. Whereas as security professionals, we say on a daily basis, email should not be trusted. You also have the user perception. Many users use web-based email like Yahoo and Google. And they say things like, well, I'm connecting to Gmail using HTTPS. So my email is secure, right? I have the padlock. There's the S for security. Now, as we dive deeper into server-to-server security, you have CEOs and directors that are saying, hey, our website has this score. Make this better. There's the visibility for web servers, but not the visibility for email servers. The SSL Labs is something by Qualys, but there's many other companies and websites available that boil it down for a website security to a simple scorecard. When it comes to email encryption, it's largely hidden from users. Where do we have the padlock symbol for our email? You know, we have HTTPS, which is the secure version of HTTP, but where's the secure version of an email address or a mail to link? It just doesn't exist. When one email server talks to another, it starts with unencrypted communication. Only after it communicates from client to server or server to server does it then upgrade to using Start TLS encryption. And this is only if both parties agree. If there is a man-in-the-middle attack, they can prevent the upgrade of encryption, they can break weak encryption, and gain access to all of the email communication from one server to the other. Common man-in-the-middle attacks use DNS cache poisoning and BGP hijacking, which is a much larger issue on its own. So if you think about security for connections, how would you feel if you were going to your bank's website and you type in that you want the encrypted version, but by default, it just says, oh, I'm going to downgrade to unencrypted without you even seeing it? You would not accept that. You would say, there's a problem here. This must be fixed. But this is the daily occurrence of email-to-email communication. By default, they can revert down to unencrypted, and nobody would notice the difference in between. So looking at a few of the high-level security options that are available, I won't go too deep into these. There's DANE. DANE associates a TLS certificate, uses DNS, and doesn't require or optionally requires a signed certificate. So for this, you can use a self-signed certificate. This requires DNS security to work properly, or DNSSEC, and it uses a TLSA record in DNS in order to say, hey, we should only be using encryption. Now, there's another competing standard called MTA-STS. This is the strict transport security for mail transfer agents. This, again, allows a mail server to declare and say, I want to use encryption, only communicate with me using encrypted channels. Now, if the strict transport security sounds familiar, that's because it's similar to the HSTS, which is strict transport security for HTTP. And it's the same way that you can say for your website, only communicate to my web server using SSL or TLS encryption. It's a bit different to DANE. This publishes a policy on a web server. So it uses encrypted communication to the web server to say, here's my policy. It requires TLS version 1.2, not just any level of encryption, but a minimum standard, which is good. And this one does require signed certificates rather than allowing unsigned. Now, there's also DKIM for domain keys for identified mail. You may have heard of this one a bit more than the other two, but this one is used for preventing spoofing and phishing email addresses or spoofing the domain name for another company. That's a bit outside of the scope here. This doesn't have anything to do with server-to-server communication, so we're not going to discuss this one too deep. This one goes off to the side a bit. Similar to DKIM is Sender Policy Framework, or SPF. Almost everybody has this deployed, so everybody should be aware of this. Again, this is not anything about encrypting email. SPF is similar to DKIM, making sure that we don't have spoofed or forged email, making it appear to come from another domain name. So again, this one's off to the side because it doesn't do anything for encryption. And finally, we have DMARC. DMARC is an extension of DKIM and SPF, and therefore is used for preventing spoofing and phishing and having more security mechanisms than the basic SPF and DKIM. Again, nothing to do with encryption. So out of these 5, if you recognize the last 3, they have nothing to do with server-to-server encryption. So don't feel bad. You're not the only one who hasn't heard of the first 2. So I did a research study. I was going through and looking at server implementations to see what was happening. Now, this information is for the Australian environment because I only did it just very recently. I haven't had time to repeat it for other economies like Taiwan, but I'll show you how I did this, and you can look at your own companies and server information. So I wrote some Python code. It's very ugly, but it gets the job done. It goes through, pulls out domain names for companies, looks at their mail server records to make sure that we're using the correct mail server and not just their domain name, pulling out all the DNS records to find out what's being implemented, and then going through and writing it out to do process the files for more. I was using a tool called testssl.sh, which you can actually get from that website domain. And this goes through and assesses the TLS certificate and cipher suites, very similar to the Qualys SSL Labs tool that you may be familiar of on the website. I also used SSL scan to verify results and a whole bunch of grep Excel and some custom scripts as well. So I went through and I looked at different groups of organizations. I looked at some of the high end, the top on the Australian Stock Exchange, the ASX 100. So these are the largest public listed companies in Australia. I then pulled the bottom end of the public listed companies, the ones that aren't as big. I also looked at Australian government, both national, federal, as well as state-based governments. I looked at Australian charity organizations. I looked at Australian internet providers. And for comparison, I looked at the top international email hosting providers, the ones that do email as their primary business. For the ASX 100, most of them are actually using hosted mail providers like PP Hosted, Outlook, Mimecast, Google, and others. 100% of them were using SPF. Great. But again, that's only preventing spoofing and phishing, nothing to do with encryption. For DMARC, similar to SPF, only 9 domains didn't have a DMARC policy. So the vast majority had DMARC. 33 domains had a DMARC policy set to none, which actually means they're not using it at all. They have it, they've configured something, but they said, but we're turning it off, which is really interesting when it comes to their protection of their brand and identity. 15 domains had it set to quarantine, and 38 domains had it set to reject, which is the highest level of protection for DMARC. Interestingly, 2 domains with a DMARC policy had no reporting email, which means if there's any failures, they won't be notified about it at all. So basically flying blind. Getting on to the encryption though, for the ASX 100 companies, MTA STS only was configured for 1 domain. Now it wasn't set to enforce, it was only set to testing mode, so this is probably them starting to implement it. But out of all of the top companies, only 1 had it, and no domains had Dane configured using TLSA records. Interestingly enough, 1 domain was actually using SMTP servers with self-signed certificates, providing very little integrity of information between the servers. If we look down at the bottom end of the Australian Stock Exchange listed companies, again, 100% SPF. One of them had a broken SPF record, so they're trying, but it seems that somebody copied and pasted records incorrectly, thus breaking 2 different records. Out of these companies, only 2 domains had a DMARC policy, so very low on that end of protection. And when it comes to encryption, none of them had MTA STS, and none of them had DANE configured. For the Australian government, a lot of these were using hosting companies, such as Outlook, as you can see, is very popular with the Australian government. For Australian government, they had 100% using SPF records, but 7 of them were using a question mark all, which basically disables SPF. So they're trying, but some of them weren't doing it properly. One domain had no DMARC policy, so again, most of them were doing the right thing there, but 24 domains had their DMARC policy set to none. They created it, but they turned it off. 0 domains for the Australian government that I assessed were using MTA STS, and 0 domains were using DANE. So none of them were requiring encryption of the email in transit, which gets repeated a few times. I looked at 20 of the largest Australian charity organizations. Again, most were using hosted, so they're outsourcing their mail to companies that do proper mail server implementations. 100% had SPF records, so they're protecting their brand from spoofing. DMARC, still, half and half. 8 didn't have a DMARC policy at all. 8 had a DMARC policy, but it was disabled. 0 domains were using MTA STS, and 0 domains were using DANE, having 0 protection for encryption of their emails in transit. Australian top ISPs. You'd think that these are the technical experts of the field. Almost all of these companies were using their own mail servers, which is to be expected. A few were outsourcing. SPF, most of them were running. 1 didn't have SPF, 11 didn't have DMARC, 5 of them had it set to none, so basically we had 16 out of 20 that weren't using DMARC at all. So they're only partially protecting their brand from spoofing. 0 of them using MTA STS, 0 of them using DANE. We then go to the international hosting providers. This is an example of some of them so you can see what types of hosting providers I'm talking about here. They're all running their own mail servers. To be expected, that's their business. This is their job. Here, again, most of them using SPF. Good to see. A few of them not using DMARC, 7 of them not using DMARC properly. Here's where we actually do have some companies using MTA STS. We have 8 of them, finally, a group of companies that are worried about the encryption of their email in transit. We also had 4 of the 20 that actually have DANE TLSA records. So they're looking at both ways of ensuring encrypted email in transit. Some were using expired certificates. This is just in general of all the companies. Some were using expired certificates. Some were using anonymous cipher suites, which basically mean, yeah, here's some encryption, but we're not going to check anything. So it allows criminals to intercept encrypted communication. One of them was using SSL version 2, which was deprecated over 12 years ago. Many were using SSL version 3 still. This was deprecated 8 years ago. If a web server was using SSL version 2 or 3, they would be shunned publicly, but their mail servers, nobody cares. TLS version 1 is now starting to be considered a little bit old, not recommended to be used on web servers. We have many of the top big email providers still using TLS version 1. None of them will allow TLS version 1 on their web server, but they definitely allow it on their mail servers. Some of them were supporting TLS version 1.3, which is wonderful to see forward, but there's plenty down here at the bottom, plenty of the large companies aren't supporting the newest version of TLS encryption on their mail servers, which is interesting. You don't pay extra for this. It's a very small configuration option, and allowing newer encryption has no impact on the older, and yet they haven't turned it on yet. So, recommendations. Test your own servers. There are some easy-to-use websites. The information to decipher takes a little bit of technical expertise, so it may require a technical specialist as opposed to a manager or director. But the websites internet.nl and aucheck.com.au are easy. You can go put in your domain name. You don't have to be in the Netherlands or in Australia to use these websites. And if you're using Linux or a Linux subsystem, you can download the tools Test SSL and SSL Scan. You can use these tools to scan your own mail servers and see this information for yourself. And if you have trouble, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help with the information that I've been using as well. And to remember, SPF, DKIM, DMARC, these are important, but for a different reason. These are important to prevent spoofing and to protect your brand. You need to set up DANE, especially if you already have DNSSEC, because it's required. If you don't have DNSSEC, you need to set up MTA-STS. Without these, there is no guarantee of encrypted email in transit. And of course, when I talked about BGP hijacking, I work for APNIC, so it's part of my job. I have to say, don't forget about RPKI. BGP hijacking is a large problem for all internet communication, not just email. So RPKI is something that you can do to help prevent that type of man-in-the-middle attack. And that is the end for my presentation. I'm sorry if I went a little bit long for my other colleagues here.
So, ladies and gentlemen, let's once again give a round of applause to Mr. Gillespie for his very fruitful presentation. And for now, do we have any questions on site or online? Due to time constraints, maybe we will only open one questions. Okay, so by the end of the session,
so
if time
maybe I
is...
can ask one question.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, thank you for the very interesting talk. So I'm just curious that what's your like suggestions for having this security indicator for email clients? So I'm asking because that recently Google has that report saying that most users don't understand the meaning of the HTTPS paylock. So I'm assuming that will be the same or even worse for email.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a good solution for the end users. It's very difficult because email protection is not the same as web server. Web server, when you type in an address, you know exactly which site that you're going to. With email servers and MX records, you can have many different MX records that all will be acting as backups for each other. I didn't go into the details for it, but when I was doing analysis, those MX records are not consistently secured. In fact, some of them were completely broken, that if the first one were to fail, the ones after it would go off in totally the wrong direction, and your email would not be successfully delivered, let alone securely delivered. So I don't know if there is a solution that would be good for the end users, which is why as the destination operators, we have to do the right thing and make things secure for everybody who might be sending us email. So yeah, it might not be for the sender's side. We as recipients of the email have to be the ones doing the right thing, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gillespie, for the answer, and also thank you, Dr. Hsiao, for the question. And due to time constraints, we will wrap up the session here. So once again, thank you very much, Mr. Gillespie, for the inspiring sharing. And also thank you for bringing up the importance of SMTP security and provides us with the recommendation options that come with higher security. And also thank you for analyzing the methodology and sharing your valuable experience with us.
And good afternoon. It's my pleasure being here to talk about DDoS attack and defense. I'll share with you some recent trends and the research opportunities. And I'm Hsu-Chun. Yeah, I'm worked at National Taiwan University. And besides my professor job, I also lead the IT security team of our university's hospital. This experience helps me bring in some real-world perspectives into research. My lab works in several areas of cybersecurity, one of which is high availability networks. That is, we would like to ensure that users can access the intended services when the network is under attack. In particular, we are interested in designing smarter DDoS attacks techniques in the hope that we can be one step ahead of the attackers and prepare defense techniques. We've also designed efficient algorithms to identify flows that send too much traffic and to identify faulty routers that don't follow network forwarding rules. Additionally, we are interested in exploring a clean slate internet that is secure by design. For the rest of the talk, I will focus on introducing several advanced DDoS attack and defense techniques. Some of them have been observed or deployed in the internet, and some remain academic curiosity so far. So first, let me briefly explain what DDoS is. We'll start with the simple version, the denial service with a single D. Denial service is an attack against availability, aiming to prevent users from accessing the intended service. To do so, DOS attacks use up the shared computing resources such as bandwidth, CPU, and memory in order to disrupt the normal functioning of a system or network. One example of a DOS attack is TCP SIM flood. In that attack, the attacker sends many SIM packets to overflow the server's TCP connection table, so the server becomes unresponsive to legitimate connection requests. The distributed version of DOS, commonly called DDoS attack, involves multiple attack sources. By using multiple attack sources, the DDoS attacker can enhance the stealthiness and intensity of the attack. The attacker usually acquires these attack sources by compromising network devices or bots, or simply pay to hire a botnet through the DDoS for hire services. Early day DDoS attacks were considered merely inconvenient. However, as our society increasingly depends on internet services, DDoS attack can cause severe consequences. For example, DDoS attacks have targeted critical infrastructures such as government, transportation, finance, and healthcare. And with the rise of the DDoS for hire platforms, everyone can easily launch a DDoS attack. Therefore, DDoS attacks have become popular. It's a popular mean for like extortion, business competition, and have recently taken a big part in political demonstration and cyber warfare. Over the past decade, DDoS attacks have grown in both volume and sophistication. The volume of DDoS attack went from 300 gigabit per second back in 2013 to now over terabit per second in 2023. This rapid growth can be attributed to the amplification techniques that magnify the attack size, which I will introduce in a few slides. Also can be attributed to the rise of Internet of Things devices, as the previous presenter mentioned, because IoT devices have provided attackers with a large number of easily exploitable bots, allowing them to launch massive attacks. So in addition to the increase in volume, DDoS attacks also become more sophisticated. Traditionally, DDoS attacks involve a high volume of traffic flooding the victim directly. However, we now see DDoS attacks evolving along two aspects. First, some attacks exploit protocol or application design flaws in order to launch more economically efficient attacks. That is, attackers can achieve significant impact with fewer resources, making their attack more cost efficient. Second, some would attack indirectly, and thus becoming harder to attribute, harder to trace back to the actual attacking source. Next, I'm going to show you 3 examples. The first one is a pausing attack, which belongs to the first type. And then the translink attack, which belongs to the second type. And then the amplification attack, which has both flavor in it. So what's a pausing attack, and why is this more cost effective? A pausing attack aims to achieve the same impact as a constant rate attack by sending square wave or pulse-like traffic pattern. It targets certain network services that adjust settings dynamically according to traffic load. To give you some concrete examples, the through attack is a type of pausing attack that exploit the TCP retransmission mechanisms. By sending short duration bursts, the attacker forces TCP flows to repeatedly enter a retransmission timeout state. Specifically, when a benign TCP flow, which is the victim, wants to retransmit, it would collide with the pause. As a result, the victim would think that, oh, the link is still congested and will wait for a longer timeout before the next retransmission, although the link may be actually empty, not congested for most of the time. Another example is called yo-yo attack, that focusing on the auto-scaling mechanisms of cloud instance. Essentially, a cloud service may quickly turn on additional virtual machines when seeing a traffic burst, but may be slow in turning them off in order to avoid oscillation. Such asymmetry can be exploited by the pausing attack to trick the cloud service to make the cloud server to open more VMs than what's necessary. We can also enhance the pausing denial service attacks into pausing distributed denial service attack by combining multiple sources together. The main challenge here is that the network latency fluctuates over time. So to achieve synchronization among multiple sources, the attacker has to observe and adjust the timing differences of sending attack packets in real time, taking into account the varying latency condition. For example, our team proposed a way to perform decentralized synchronization through observed conjunction. The second advanced attack is the amplification attack. It leverages 2 weaknesses in the current internet to amplify attack traffic. The first weakness is the lack of authentication for source IP. Attackers can insert the victim's IP into their request to some public service, such as DNS. And as shown on the slide, the DNS server will unknowingly send its response to the victim. The second weakness is that the response sent by some services is much larger than the request packet. So by combining these 2 weaknesses, an attacker can send a small DNS request that get amplified into like 50 to 100 times the original traffic, all direct toward the victim. In addition to utilizing DNS, the amplification techniques can also be applied to other protocols, such as NTP, main cache, and TCP middlebox. The amplification factors can be up to tens of thousands of times. And one interesting things about the TCP middle box amplification is that typical TCP requires completing a three-way handshake before sending actual payload. So the sender IP cannot be spoofed. However, this particular TCP middle box amplification attack leverages middle boxes that are meant to do censorship. And because of that, those middle boxes aggressively respond to incomplete TCP handshakes. And that's why they can be leveraged to perform amplification in this scenario. And then the third advanced DDoS attack is the TWNIC DDoS attack. The attack targets TWNIC instead of end servers. By congesting a TWNIC that is on a critical path to many endpoints, the impact can be significant. Handling TWNIC DDoS attacks is challenging. What makes this attack powerful is not only because it's wide impact, but also because its ability to bypass certain existing defense mechanisms. The reason is that the TWNIC attack does not attack the victim directly. Instead, as you can see on the slide, the bots send attack traffic to each other, or to send attack traffic to public servers. They are not the primary target. And the victim, which is the offset face here on the slide, doesn't receive any attack traffic at all. So it may take a while for it to figure out what's happening, and then finally call the upstream ISP for help. So how can we defend against such advanced DDoS attacks? We can broadly categorize defense into three types. The first type is prevention, which focuses on avoiding security flaws by design. For example, an internet architecture that ensures source and path validation will prevent many types of DDoS, because IP spoofing is the root cause of many DDoS attacks. And the second type is detection, which aims to identify DDoS attack flows, bots, or command and control servers, and then remove them. This is the most common type, and the representative solution is cloud or ISP-based traffic grouping services. The challenge of this type lies in how to accurately distinguish benign from malicious. And the third type is resilience. And the objective here is that we want to enhance the system's robustness against DDoS, allowing graceful performance degradation. Next, I'm going to give you one example for each of these types. So in the resilient type of defense, one approach is topology obfuscation. Topology obfuscation creates virtual topology to hide the potential targets, such as the bottleneck link in TWNIC DDoS, to hide the actual target from the attacker. This can be done using software-defined networking, which enable programmable control over forwarding paths. Topology obfuscation can tolerate attack traffic without needing to identify it. But the main challenge here is that how to minimize the interference with normal network functionalities, such as traceroute. And the next example is traffic grouping, which is one of the most common type of DDoS solution in practice. And it belongs to the detection and recovery type. Traffic grouping works by redirecting traffic to a dedicated grouping service, which then filters the attack traffic on behalf of the target server. And like cloud-based traffic grouping typically uses DNS for redirection by resolving the server's domain name to an IP address owned by the cloud service. Some also utilize BGP for redirection. And using DNS for redirection is faster, but If an attacker knows the server's IP address, then the attacker can easily bypass the cloud. And on the other hand, using BGP may be smaller, but it's making it harder for attacker to bypass the defense. But the route adjustment are more coarse-grained in this case. So the advantage of using traffic grouping is that it's easy to deploy. I think this is one of the main advantage and explain why it's so popular. Because organizations don't need to purchase their own security equipment. And another advantage is that it can be activated on demand. And also, cloud or ISP providers have larger bandwidth capacity and can handle high volume of attack traffic. However, outsourcing the filter task has some drawback, such as the lack of transparency and privacy concerns. Specifically, privacy concerns arise because the traffic grouping center needs to inspect the plain text content to detect attack patterns. As a result, many traffic grouping centers require the server to provide their private key or session key so that they can decrypt HTTPS encrypted traffic. So the third category is prevention, such as clean slate security internet. The current internet, as we know, was not designed with security in mind. Additional mechanisms are needed to ensure the authenticity of IP, TCP, BGP, and DNS. Instead of patching the current internet, one may consider starting from scratch and rebuild the internet. For example, Hsiao is a proposal for a future internet that aims to address the fundamental issues of the current internet. In Hsiao, it's impossible to forge IP addresses because each entity's IP is derived from its public key hash. And packets must contain authenticated path information to be forwarded securely. Okay, so while doing DDoS research, we found that many DDoS attack and defense proposals are hard to reproduce and evaluate due to the lack of applicable dataset and public simulators. And many papers simply make ad hoc assumptions when constructing the topology, bot distribution, attack traffic, and background traffic. Or just take existing dataset and simulator for evaluation without really examining their applicability and limitations. So I think it's important to think about how to take a more scientific approach to DDoS research and design ecologically valid evaluation methods. In conclusion, so DDoS attacks thrives on the current internet, which because the destination have little control over the packet they receive and the source IP address can be easily spoofed. And recently we see DDoS attacks are increasing in both volume and sophistication, and there's still significant room for improvement in DDoS defense. Looking ahead, I think one research opportunity is transitioning from best effort mitigation to offering more reliable and meaningful guarantees. Another research opportunity is moving away from ad hoc evaluation and focus on reproducible and ecological valid evaluation methods. And this concludes my talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hsiao, for the fruitful presentation. And I think due to time constraints, we will not open the floor for QA, but if you have any questions for the speaker, please hand the question to our organizers. We will help direct the questions to the speakers after the forum. And once again, thank you very much, Dr. Hsiao, for the presentation. And now we will move to our next speaker. Okay, so before we move to our next speaker, I would like to once again thank Dr. Hsiao for introducing DDoS, sharing with us how to design smarter DDoS attack and defense mechanisms, identify overused network flows and faculty routes, and also explore a clean state future internet. And also, thank you very much, Dr. Hsiao, for walking us through the trend and some of the challenges, and also highlight a great many key points with us. And for our last session, the speaker will be Mr. Ken Lee. Mr. Lee is a security consultant at Amazon Web Services, providing professional security governance, risk management, and compliance consulting for the cloud. And now, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I will hand the floor to Mr. Lee. The floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction. So, good afternoon or good evening, everyone. My name is Ken Lee, and my English version of speech draft has yet to be approved. So my apologies to have the session in Mandarin today. So fortunately, the approved material is made in English. So if you are interested in my talk, please feel free to catch up after this session. Thank you. So 谢谢大家，我看起来今天应该会耽误到大家吃饭时间。好，那今天我们想分享一下，就是 Amazon 怎么样去做我们的 security culture， 我们的治安文化。那同时呢，我们要思考一下，说我们实际上做了多少的努力实做，那给大家一些建议跟参考。好，那我之前是在 Synology 做产品安全，做 TWCERT， 那跟前面就是 Q 这边做类似的事情，我们都是 TWCERT 的 member。好，那现在的话就是我加入 Amazon， 加入 AWS 之后，我们会从过去从产品安全的角度来看一下这些 global practice 长什么样子。好，所以今天的话，我们先快速看一下，说我们会谈一些事情。第一个就是说，在 Amazon 里面我们怎样去做治安的协作。那第二个是我们有哪些 build decisions 去确定说我们要去做政策上的调整。那第三个的话就是我们怎么样去看到去避免或者说把这个需要做苦工这件事情去做减免，或者是说让它自动化。那最后的话就是看一下说我们怎么样去衡量我们目前的指标。好，那在进入今天这个主题之前呢，我们想聊一下在2021年的12月9号，大家还记得发生什么事情吗？其实是 Log4j 的事情。好，那 Log4j 的话呢，在我们全球的统计话，在我们都有个 pager， 好，就是每个 Amazonian 都会被要求装一个 pager app。那有问题的时候，紧急的事情呢就会戳你。好，那一天总共发了18000个人的 pager 去戳它，好，准备要去修 Log4j。那很不幸的呢，75%的 pager 都是在大家不在上班的时候去戳到它，所以大家都蛮辛苦的。那其实最重要的一个 data point 是说，我们统计下来总共有150万个 manual actions for remediation。好，那就是说，其实150万个 manual action 对于几乎自动化的 AWS Cloud 来说是一件蛮可怕的事情。所以因为这个 initiative， 我们去想了一下，就是我们的 global leadership 去想一下，说怎么样来控制或是缓解类似未来一些事件发生的时候，我们可以怎么样做得更好。好，那我们会先回顾一下，说都有哪些的design considerations。好，那 Amazon 一直在讲说 customer obsession 是我们的top run goal。好，那我们在处理 customer obsession 的时候，从 infrastructure provider 的角度，我们的 customer 是谁？其实是我们的 engineer。好，那再从这个角度往下看的时候，就是我们想要透过这次的机制改善，去降低整体的成本，针对这些修补上面，特别是软体更新的这个步骤。好，那第二个事情是我们怎么样能够去避免或者尽量去缓解需要手动进入这个 production 或者是说做 maintenance 的时候，能够缓解这样的情境。那第三个的话，当然是对不起，前一个就是同样我们在人为进行这个资源部署的时候，通常都会发生不可预期的错误嘛，特别是150万个错一个、错两个，其实都很正常。但是我们很难去经得起这样的成本去发生错误，所以原则上 Amazon 所有的 deployment 都是 automate， 但是这些 automation 会需要更多时间投资，所以这边的话就是要做一个评量，去看说我们到底可以做哪些事情。 那最后的话就是在整个Amazon 的服务架设过程当中，我们后来的决策其实是希望让终端的 engineer 尽可能的使用这些 abstraction， 就是他不要手动或者去 code 一些 low level library， 因为他只要 code 的越 low level， 我们越难去由 centralized team 去提供一些 service 或是 guarantee 或是 assurance 来确保说后续的维护成本。好，那除了这3个之外呢，还有3点跟大家分享，就是所有的 decision making 在 Amazon 其实都是需要大量 data point。好，那我们就是透过这一次前面的统计，刚刚提到说150万个 manual actions 这件事情，那这个触发 leadership team 发现说需要更多的投资来做 automation 嘛。好，那同时有了这些 data point， 我们就可以确定说，目前的监控机制还有哪些不足的地方可以去做调整。那同时，因为有一些统计跟refinement improvement， 可以让后续我们的行为做得更好。那最后的话，就是说在整个 lesson learn 的期间，会是一个既有的文化，原本就已经有了，只是我们再特别 highlight 一次这件事情，是说，每一个 incident 其实都是一个好的学习机会，如同前面的 breaker 嘛。那我们要怎么样透过类似的情境或者说分享来确保说新进员工都能知道当时Log4j 有多么惨烈。好，所以这6点的这个 focus， 那就确保了我们后面想要做的事情。好，那这边的话来提一下说我们的 CISO CJ Moses 他讲了一句话，或是他怎么样定义 Amazon 的working model。好，就是 service team 就是开发 EC2 或是 S3 这些cloud service 的 service team， 他们 own the security of their services, but Amazon Web Services Security AWS Security owns the security of AWS。 意思就是说，除了 service team 之外，我们的 security team、global security team 大家各司其职。好，那从过去的角度来看说，那请问 Log4j 到底是谁要补啊？是 security team 帮你补吗？还是service team 要帮你补？那过去的答案其实，或是到现在的答案，一直都还是 service team 需要做这样子的调整。但是怎么样加速这个流程，或是我们 security team 能够提供怎么样的协助，去帮助 service team 更好的做完这些 software update， 就变成后面想讨论的一些话题。好，那这个这个 SDLC 其实各位应该都很熟悉了，就是过去怎么开发，其实 Amazon 大概也都是这样在做。好，那我们换一个角度来看，就是如果是加上 security 的话，我们会多做哪些事情？其实对台湾的社群来讲，或是台湾听众来讲，对我来说比较重要的其实是 Amazon 非常强调 threat model， 就是过去虽然说我在 Synology 的 Product Security Incident Response Team 做了非常长的时间，但我们当时也还没有额外的一些 budget 或者是说一些 capability to do threat modeling。那但是进到 Amazon 之后，我们发现 threat modeling 会是一个baseline， 就是每个 service 其实都得要做自己的 threat model。好，特别是 service team 要 own 他们的 threat model。好，那有了 threat model 之后，后续我们其实才有办法去加速我们任何的后续的部署，或者说做更进阶的 AppSec review。好，那再收敛一下，就是我们大概知道了这些 SSDLC 在 Amazon 怎么做之后呢，其实下一步就回到了我们要解决问题的产出目标是什么。那第一个其实就是确保这些 update 或是这些service 能够在合理的时间，或者说在预期的时间内发布。好，特别是 with high security bar， 就是说服务该推，但是一定要安全才能推，不然的话，这有违反于 Amazon 的 policy number one， 就是 security is job zero。我们所有的服务都会经过非常多很复杂的测试，相较于台湾的一些 practice 来说。好，那第二个事情就是我们会在开发的周期里面，就是 identify 一系列的 risk and findings。好，那这边提到前面的 threat modeling， 后面的这些 vulnerability assessment， 或者是说 architecture review， 这些都是理所当然会施做的项目来达成这个目标嘛。好，那第3个的话就是说，我们会更进步的去看说目前的这些 review process 还有哪些可以做得更好、更精准 raise the bar 之外，怎么样去加速这样子的整体的逻辑。好， 那我们的解法跟我们的 strategy 是什么呢？就是从过去来看，Amazon Web Service 的 development team 非常非常大。那过去的 bottleneck 其实就是在 application security team 身上。那各位想一下，就是刚刚我们抽了18000个 engineer， 那请问有多少的 application security engineer 能够去提供这些 service， 或是提供必要的emergency process review。 好，那在过去实行大家都很辛苦。好，那有了这些 review 之后，因为组织的 policy 是要 review 完才能上线嘛，那这样就变成是说压力全部或者 bottleneck 全部都集中在 application security 身上。好，那其实这件事情也很简单，其实就是当组织达到一定规模的时候，就必须要让它散出去。好，那我们做的事情是尽可能的让这些 engineer 多多了解 application security 在做什么。意思就是我们需要去教导或者说去沟通 security people 在想什么，然后 engineer 在想什么。透过这样子内部的不同角度、不同 perspective 的沟通之后，我们就可以尽量把这个 review process 再往前移。在他们在画 design document 的时候，其实就可以拉出来说，到底有哪些事情可以自己就先挡掉，而不是说在 review process 才被抓出来。所以这样子的话，目前我们下一页会看到 data point， 但是目前的话就是策略非常非常简单，把这个开发或者是 security review 的时间再往左边移一点。好，那其实这个就是今天我们想谈到这个 AWS Guardian Program。好，那我们要谈 data point 嘛？那目前公开可以讲的 data point 是说，目前我们总共 train 了2000名以上的 engineer 去做这些 Guardian。好，那他们带来什么样的效益呢？就是根据我们不完全的统计，其实我们已经减少22.5%的这些 medium severity 或者是 high severity 的 findings。好，就是卡在原本的这个 review process 里面都已经往前移了。好，我们缓解了22.5%。那同时呢，我们解决了大概26.9%的时间来做 end-to-end 的 security review。好，那意思就是把这些工作正式的还给 engineer， 让 security people 能够睡好觉。好，其实这就是一个非常直白的一个策略。好，那我们要怎么开始呢？对台湾组织来说，其实搭配上过去的经验，比较重要的第一点就是要跟老板谈一下我们组织的目标是什么，我们能不能够争取到预算来做这个投资。在跨出第一步要去建立这个 Guardian Program 之前，或是我们讲说 Liaison Program 之前，多少还是要去开发一些课程，或是内部沟通engineering team 的需求、knowledge 跟 capability 之后，需要由 security people 来准备必要的教材。好，那这个都是投资。好，那第二步的话，其实就是要找人啊，就是内部有多少的mentorship 可以来使用。其实以台湾目前的情境上来说，有这个豪华配置不太多吼。那 Panasonic 有没有问题？但其他的组织我不确定有多少，所以这一段会是一个台湾目前比较遇到大的一个 gap。那第三个的话，其实就是一样，我们除了这个一脉传承的这个 liaison program 或是 Guardian program 之外，怎么样去组织内部的 community 会是一个比较重要的地方。那目标其实就是 knowledge sharing。我们不能一直有 security people 不断上课，就是一直灌输 security perspective， 但是有一些 engineering perspective 也是需要贡献回给security people， 所以这样子的 community 或者说这样的 communication 都是一个非常重要的双向循环。那第四个的话就是说，我们需要花一些时间去 recognize 我们这些 liaison 或是 guardian， 就是其实大家做事或特别是对 engineer 来说要去做 security 的事情。对他来说，其实一个是 extra effort。那我们需要让他能够更有动力下去做的话，其实就是这些 recognition。那最后的话，就是我们需要去持续收集这些 feedback。我们的 engineering team 大概每个月都会收到一次questionnaire， 去看说，目前对于我们使用的工具有没有什么 feedback， 或者是说他有遇到什么样的问题，可以继续让这个 security engineering 这边来帮忙。好。那这个是针对我们策略跟实作的第一步。那我们再回到就是这个 SDLC 的部分哦，就是这个是一个 SDLC 没有错，但如果说我们考量到这个维护时间的话，它大概会变成这样子哦，就是开发在针对一个长期维运的项目， 这个开发时间到最后大概平均来说大概就是10%左右。好，那我们要花更多的时间去降低维运的成本或是人力。好，那这个就是下一步我们想要做的事情。好，那这边的目标也其实很简单啊，就是说我们要确定让我们的 engineer、让我们的 builders 能够很明确的指示他要去怎么样去 prioritize plan for remediation。那第二个事情就是说，我们还是要求强烈的建议减少人为介入环境的部署。好，那同时需要尽量自动化的去缓解我们已经辨识到的问题。好，那第三个话其实就是要让 engineer 在开发的时候就知道哪些是 out of date 的 package 或是dependency 不能使用，这个就是能够去维持或是降低后面 operation effort 的一个地方。好，那我们做了什么？就是其实这个是内部系统。好，那这个内部系统可以讲的事情是说，我们会持续去 track 就是整个组织在使用的这些 open source dependency。那这些 open source dependency 其实讲白了，其他就是 Amazon 版本的 SBOM， 就是这些 SBOM information 其实都已经中央控管，然后我们会知道说哪些版本在什么 service 内部是被使用。那有了这样子的服务之后，其实已经大幅降低我们后续维运的成本。不要看这个很简单，但其实蛮多组织都还没开始做，所以这边会是一个直接的例子，告诉大家说，其实汇整自己的 SBOM 会是一个很不错的开始，至少 Amazon 也这样做了。那第二个部分就是说，在这个 assurance service 里面有整合回我们 R&D 的这个 development environment， 就是说我们在写 code 的时候，其实就可以直接抓到说你有哪些过时的套件，其实都会被抓出来。好，那在我们的 editor 或是我们 IDE 里面就会看到说有些 warning 跳出来。那有跳 warning 的当下，其实你就不可能扫密码，就是这些户口都已经被创好了。所以透过一层一层的机制，除了前面有集中的这些 inventory 或是这些 SBOM 都建好之后，那下一步就是在开发过程当中，再把这个过程往左边移，那确保说我们能够尽早发现问题，然后提早去做修补，这样子会有明确的一些效益出来。那对于各位听众来讲，其实 Amazon 做的事情已经有这些 service 在 AWS 上面了，所以其实可以透过整个 AWS 的 code pipeline 来达成类似的目标。那今天我们没有要讲产品，但是原则上这些服务在我们自己吃狗食的情况下，都可以透过既有的 managed service 来实做。好，那大家应该想吃饭哈，那我这边就准备要结束了。那这个今天在结束之前呢，可能会给一些建议，就是说在 Amazon 的逻辑里面，能够把服务交出去，或是能够把你的服务 migrate to managed service 的一些 strategy 会是我们建议的，因为人比服务更贵。好，这是 Amazon 的逻辑。所以怎么样做 undifferentiated heavy lifting 这件事情，在 Amazon 的字典里面，其实就是能自动化的、能转去 managed service 的，全部都把它转过去，把 engineer 的时间留在开发它最有价值的产出，去写 code， 而不是去维护这些基础建设。好，就算是以前 Synology， 我们也要花很多时间去维护基础建设，因为我们没有办法使用 managed service。但到 AWS 之后，给我带来的冲击，其实就是大规模的服务，其实全部都是这些都是挂在这些 managed service 身上。好，那当然就是尽量还是要避免我们的就是 manual access。好，那最后的话，其实就是这些 workflow 都会有完整的 CI/CD pipeline。那同时，如果心有余力的话，再加上 approval process， 那就是目前我们对于实作层面上面的一些建议。好，那第二个事情就是说，在合作层面上，我们前面有提到说我们的Guardian Program 嘛，好，那我们就是要去逆向开发，从 security perspective 要逆向去开发这些 engineer， 让他懂 security， 让他懂 application security expert 在想什么。好，那这样的话，把这些工作慢慢的往前交回去，那其实变相会节省到 security people 的时间，我们可以去做更深度的这个threat research。好，那当然就是我们需要去recognize their impact。好，其实这个就是其实尽量避免让这些 engineer 就是做得很无聊，那需要奖励他针对 security 上面的贡献。好，那最后一个的话就是说，在衡量这些指标的时候，对 Amazon 来说，全部事情都要是 data point， 所以以我们的角度给出来建议就是，要去想一下怎么去衡量你的成果。 那有可能，因为每个组织的情境都不太一样，但是至少可以做一件事情是衡量我们 end-to-end security review 的时间。如果说你还没有 security review， 你可以先开始做，去试看第一 round， 你要花3天完成一个 review， 改到好要花3天。那后面我们把这些工具往左移，或者把这些机制引入之后，能不能够让我们的 security engineer 能够在半天之内把事情做完？好，那有这些 major 有些 matrix 之后，其实大概就是今天我们整个会诊下来想要给大家建议。好，那今天我社群到这边，谢谢大家。
Thank you very much, Mr. Lee, for the informative sharing. And due to time constraints, we will now open the floor for QA. Thank you. And before we close the session, I would like to invite all our speakers to have a group photo together. Okay, so as now we'll have our photographers in the front. Everybody, let's look to the camera. And I know everybody must be a little bit hungry and tired, but please show me your prettiest smile. Perfect. Okay, so for the second one, let's thumb up together. Thank you very much. Everybody, let's give another round of applause for our 4 speakers today. Thank you.